First, we'll begin UV unwrapping this block piece. So on the modifier, you can type UN and then hit enter, and that will give you the unwrap UVW modifier. If we open up our UV editor, we can see what the UVs look like. And then to get a better look, we'll go ahead and make a checkered material we can apply on our object. So in the diffuse button, we'll plug in a checker map, click OK, and then in the settings for that map, we can change some things. Let's apply and show it to the object so we can actually see what we're changing. So we'll want to adjust the tiling up pretty high to a value of about 20. And then we can change the color to make it a little bit easier on our eyes. So back in our UV editor, we can hit that checker box to turn off the background, since we don't really need to see one at this point. So first I'm going to select the entire thing. Make sure you uncheck that icon so that way when we make our marquee selection in the viewport, it will select everything. If it's turned on, it's only going to select what the camera can see. Then we'll go to mapping, normal mapping, choose box mapping. That will do a planar map on 6 sides. And that's a pretty good starting point for objects and complex objects. So now we can just move these pieces off to the side, just so we can see what's going on a little bit better. If we have the checkbox checked at this bottom here, we can click on one component and it will select the entire UV shell. I'll just select like pieces so that way I can section them together in my editor. Okay, now that we've seen what all the different sections are, let's go ahead and break up pieces that don't need to be together, like these faces here on the front and back part of the block. We don't need to have those spoke pieces involved, so I'll just go ahead and select the spoke pieces and do a box mapping to just have them all be on their own here in the middle of the viewport. Now in edge mode, we can go in and select the edges that we want to be sewn together. And then using that blue custom button, we can move and sew the pieces together. So we're going to repeat this process for the rest of these little spoke pieces. Once we have the shells laid out, sometimes they're skewed a little bit and the texture is not showing up at the correct ratio. So we can select the shell and then go to Tools, Relax. I find I get the best results from going to Polygon Faces and then click Start Relax. Now, if you do that, but you still notice there's some skewing going on, then you may want to reset the X form of your object. If I select my object and then go to the Scale tool, Down at the bottom, we can see that there are some scale values on this object. The object is not at 100% right now. It's still keeping track of when it was first made. So we'll go over to our Utilities tab, click on Reset Xform, Reset Selected. That puts a Reset Xform modifier on top of everything. So then we can just right-click Convert to Editable Poly to collapse that stack. And then we'll put a Unwrap UVW modifier on top just to get back to where we were. And now when we perform unwraps, it should give us the correct size. Once we've got all the UV shells the way we want them, we can go to the Layout button, and that will just make them all the same size. So they're going to get the same amount of texture resolution. It's also going to try to pack them in that 0 to 1 space. Now, doing this automatic layout doesn't always give us the smartest choice, because we want to lay out our UVs in a way that makes sense to us. So that way, whatever method we're texturing, it's going to be easy for us to do something. So now I'm just going to go through and section these off again and then align them. Now, these top faces, I would like them all to be aligned, so that way the top row is aligned and the bottom row is aligned, but as we move them, they can sometimes get out of whack. So what we can do is use our alignment tools and our pivot to adjust this. So we can change the pivot of this selection and then click on the Align, and it's going to align our selection to the pivot. So now I'll do it for the top row, align my pivot to the top of my selection, and then I'll use the Align tool to fix that. Now it's just all about getting those pieces to fit in the 0 to 1 space. We want to make sure that no pieces are overlapping. There's some space left between the pieces, and we want them to fit inside of that 0 to 1 space. Now, because later on I'm going to attach the rest of the pieces of this object, I'm just going to go ahead and move these UVs off to the side, because later when we have the rest of the objects attached, we'll want them all to be in the 0 to 1 space. Now, because this is a cylinder shape, we actually have a type of projection mapping that works well with cylinders. So we're going to select all of the faces of this object. Make sure you check off that select setting. And then over on the right, we can go to the cylinder projection. And then you just choose the axis that you want the projection to happen in. It's going to be the y-axis for this one. And so now it's going to give us a UV shell more like what we want. The front part of this object isn't really shown correctly in this type of projection mapping. This front face is just smushed together. So what we're going to do is select these front faces. And then do a planar map to those. So it's just a projection in one axis. So we'll, over on the right, click on the planar map button. Alright, now we have 2 UV shells that we can work with. So looking at the cylindrical one, something that we need to fix is our seam. We usually want to place the seams in places where they're not going to be very noticeable. So we could place that directly at the bottom middle edge of this object. So we'll switch over to edge mode, select the edges where we want our new seam to be, and then in the edit UV window, go to Tools, Break, or Control B. Now we have our seam where we want it. So these green lines are other places where the edges are not sewn together, and we don't want them to be seams, so we're just going to go in and select those and use our blue custom Move and Sew button. So now we'll sew together those edges, and there we go. We'll perform a relax to make sure everything's unfolded correctly. If you perform a relax and it does something weird like this, then you may need to flip the UV faces. So just with them selected, right click, and then go to flip horizontal. Now try relaxing it again and you might get something that makes more sense. So relaxing this is causing it to come out at a circular angle, which is fine depending on how we're going to be texturing it. In some cases that works, but what I want to do is just keep it very straight, so that way it'll be easy to paint certain details. So I'm going to go ahead and Control Z that relax, and then using my transform tool up here at the top, I'll just kind of scale it manually. And then I can just come in and select the vertices and move them to get it to be unfolded properly. So after that's done, we can do a layout, and then we'll go in and scale both of these together to try to match them up with the other pieces of the object. For this piece, we'll select all of the faces, do a planar map, relax it, reset the X form if necessary, and then make sure the checker resolution matches up with the other objects. Because I reset the X form and then did a convert to editable poly, the other duplicates of this are no longer instances. So we'll just delete those and then duplicate them over again. I can use an array to do it a little bit faster. I know it's going to rotate 60 degrees and that I need a certain number of copies. So once we've got everything laid out, we can convert one of them to an editable poly and then do an attach. And now I'll click on every single element to add it to that object. So now if I check out the UVs for this new object, I can come in and make sure that everything fits in the 0 to 1 space. I'll speed up this part. And once I'm happy with the layout of my UVs, and we want to save out a guide of this so that way we can take it into Photoshop or some other texture software, we'll go to Tools, Render UVW Template. We want to make sure that we're using a power of 2 image size, and so for this I'm going to do 2048 by 2048. Then we'll hit the render button. This is going to pop up a render preview, and the preview may look a little ugly. There may be some pixels that are missing, but once you save it out, it's going to be fine. So we'll click on the save button, and we can save it out as a JPEG because this is just being used as a guide. That image format works out fine for us. Alright, and that's it for UV unwrapping our model.